people will no longer accept an action RPG that doesn't have instant buyouts as a trade for a trade system. So therefore, we will need to change. And as I said, that's we have to move with the times, right? Like we can't. And as I said before, I don't want to have any excuses if players are not enjoying something. We need to find a way to solve that problem. So we will solve that problem. We will find a way. That's my thinking on it anyway.
Greetings Exiles, I'm Gav. In this video, we'll be exploring the history of Path of Exile's trading system. Trade has been up for constant debate within the community, even since the alpha and beta of Path of Exile 1, and there hasn't been any large trade and economy innovations made in Path of Exile 2. Using the official Path of Exile website for trading wasn't always how it worked, however. It used to be much more difficult to acquire upgrades for your character, and the current state of trading items is likely far easier than GGG, and particularly Chris Wilson would prefer. Trading has gone through many iterations since Path of Exile's inception. I was curious myself and wanted to document my findings. So, without further ado, let's travel back to the beginning and see what the state of trading in Path of Exile's economy was like over a decade ago, and how we ended up where we are today.
The next thing is that there's no auction house or gold. See, when you want to go to a vendor and sell something, like let me show you guys here. So I'm going to go here, sell items. I want to sell this ring. I get like 3 alteration shards. I don't get gold. There is no gold. All you get is like these little things that's called like currencies, and you use these to like modify items that you would later find in the game. There's no gold, you might be surprised. It's like, wait a minute. Crip thinks it's a positive that the game doesn't have an auction house? Alright guys. World of Warcraft, love the auction house. Diablo 3, I don't want to see auction houses again. Like, auction houses work as long as the best items are not, exclusively on the auction house. And with a game like this, where there's no soulbound items, I think it's absolutely perfect to not have an auction house, and even to go that extra step to remove gold.
I found forum posts and desperate pleas on Reddit for Grinding Gear Games to add an in-game auction house, all the way back to the launch of the game in 2013. If we go back another year or two in the beta of Path of Exile, the game didn't even have a functioning trade window to exchange items. Early trading required players to party up, meet in the mudflats. The seller would drop their items and the buyer would drop their currency, while both of them hoped that the other wouldn't scam them. The level of trust required in this method was immense. Scammers were blacklisted and shamed by the community on the forums, but the scams were just a symptom of this underdeveloped trade system. This was addressed in late 2012 by GGG in patch 0.9.13F by adding a trade window into the game for players in the same instance. Shortly after that, in patch 0.9.13L, they added a separate trade chat to the game in order to keep global chat clear. Trading items in Path of Exile from here on during the beta and early years of the game's life usually took place via spamming in-game trade chat. In trade chat, you would either state what you were selling, what you were looking to buy, or pounce on the sales of other players that were advertising their items in the chat by messaging them directly. As the game's popularity grew and trade chat became a mess of spam, the official forums quickly became the go-to for buying and selling items. Players could open up their own shops via a forum thread and link their items for sale directly from in-game onto the forums. Grinding Gear Games even made the forums communicate with the game client in order to allow for the verified tag to show up on items linked on the forums. This verified tag let potential buyers know that your wares were legitimate, as to get this tag, the item had to be found in your stash. The issue with forum listings on the buyer side, though, was search functionality on the official website. Scrolling through or attempting to use keywords to locate forum threads with items you wanted was quite a chore. As frustration grew with manual forum browsing, players sought alternative solutions, leading to the rise of third-party tools and websites like Exiles Stats and PoE.XYZ. These third-party sites began sprouting up all over the place to try and lessen some of the manual labor required in finding the items you wanted. ExileStats.com provided currency exchange rates and market values all the way back in 2013, and was widely used by the community. Kripparrian himself put out a guide video on how to use a site called PoE.XYZ that scraped the forums and indexed all available items in the economy that other players were selling. Knowing how to use this site puts you at a huge advantage over other players. It made the buying portion a lot less tedious, and sellers were happy too, as their offerings didn't sit for as long and could be found much easier. While trading in-game via trade chat was definitely still used, forum shops were becoming the norm as they allowed your items to be viewed even when you were offline. Eventually, tools such as procurement, as early back as February 2013, were created by community members and offered up as another solution to the trade friction. Procurement was a stash management software that linked to your session ID in order to aid you in automatically creating forum shop threads. It used items from your stash and posted it to a forum shop thread with just a few clicks. Once you posted this thread, your items would soon be indexed on these trade websites, and you would begin receiving messages from buyers. Trades were coordinated via forum direct messaging or commenting in these threads. You'd then meet with the buyer or seller and trade the item over for the price that was agreed upon. Over the years, the prominent website for buying and selling quickly became PoE.Trade, which worked in a similar fashion to PoE.xyz. PoE.Trade indexed all of the forum shop threads and available items, while allowing you to search with a much more robust filtering system for an item that you wanted. These websites were a short-term solution to the major problem that trading in Path of Exile had, but the players still weren't happy about the state of trade or the intentional friction that GGG created with it. And a fair few players chose to not interact with trade at all, dubbing themselves solo self-found, before the separate game mode was even created. Chris and the team have always welcomed community resources and tooling. However, these particular third-party trading sites were riddled with RMT, price fixing, scams, botting, and otherwise. All of this led to even further frustrations from the community, and more desire for a secure in-game economy. Finally, in 2016, Grinding Gear Games began making moves towards improving the trading experience on their own terms. Scraping the forums was time-consuming for these third-party websites. Items that were listed on the forums didn't show up immediately on PoE.Trade and could sometimes take hours or even days for the data to be indexed. Also, if you wanted your items to sell, you needed to be online in-game constantly and available to make the trade. In March of 2016, Jonathan made the announcement on the official forums for public stash tabs. The premium stash tabs that were already sold as a convenience in the microtransaction store for additional storage space could now be toggled as public. These public stash tabs used a special API that was made available to third-party websites, such as PoE.Trade, in order to index your shop in near real time. This was a huge step forward towards convenience for the player in keeping trade in-game. The forums and trade chat were still available, but once this functionality for public stash tabs went live, there was a sharp decline in their use and a sharp increase in the use of PoE.Trade, especially now that the indexed listings were even more accurate and instantaneous. On the State of Exile podcast in April of 2016, hosted by Ziggy D and Xenocide Genius, Chris Wilson gave his in-depth philosophy on trade and items in the economy during the Parandus League.
So Ziggy, you want to kick things off with trading?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever the topic of trading comes up, myself and I think a lot of community members take the position that trading is an integral part of Path of Exile, like that the game is balanced around it, and that the optimal game experience for most people is going to be involving trading in some fashion. I'm curious, but is that your position, like officially at GGG, that you guys designed Path of Exile with the intent of trading being a very core element to it? Or is it more trying to push things in the direction of, self-found and trading just being one option of how to play?
So items are a big part of Path of Exile, and at all times we try to keep it so that you can physically trade an item to someone else. Now there's an important distinction here because, put it this way, if it was a completely self-found game, like some other action RPGs that don't have trade at the moment, then while you can find an item that someone else is jealous of, there's no ability for you to give it to them if you wanted to. The ability here in Path of Exile that you've got the item and you could give it to them, but you're not going to do it, is an important part of having the wealth. It makes you better than the other player. And so it's very important to us that people can trade, that there is trading in the game. Having said that, there are many drawbacks to having fast and efficient trade in the game. When you're playing through the game, if you have the ability to instantly swap out some item that's not good for your character for one that is, you're seeing a lot more items than someone who isn't engaging with the trade system or does sporadic trading. And that means that the game is a ton easier, and so we have to make it harder, and then it's hard for the people who, a lot harder for the people who aren't trading. So the easier we make trading, the bigger the gap between traders and non-traders in the game. And there are many people who don't really like to trade often. When we survey players, it may feel like everyone's trading, but honestly it's only a small portion of the player base because most people mindlessly continue to play the game without really engaging with the community or trading. They're the silent masses. And so if we say, okay, amazing trade tools, you could instantly get everything you want for your character, then it will certainly lead to those players having a bit of a rough experience, assuming we balance the game around this. And if we don't balance the game around this, then the power creep that we're seeing just continues at a faster rate. Having said that, there are trade improvements coming because it's a bit cumbersome at the moment. But this is the problem we have here, where we can't just trivialize the trading experience because it will be bad for a group of players who are currently not vocalizing that.
In an interview with Zizarin and Mathel just over 3 years ago, Chris was questioned again about a free stash tab for new accounts to prevent the paid entry to the trade system with premium stash tabs being required.
Is there ever a sort of a plan to maybe give a free tab to people, like that you can work towards, for example? Like, you complete Act 10 or something, you get a tab, or specifically even a premium tab, one that you can start selling stuff off, because that's a very powerful tool. So maybe gate it behind, playing enough of the game.
This is a tricky one, because I definitely see the argument that A, it could cause people to buy more tabs, or be a gateway to tabs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it does help for players who are playing free and want more capacity, right? Like, I'm sympathetic towards a user who has the 4 base tabs and is gradually finding them more full as we spam the game full of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The tricky part is that selling tabs, especially the first tab you get, is kind of our core monetization. Like, a lot of users will wisely, I say wisely because they're being careful with their money, just buy a small amount of currency, currency, maybe a map tab, and then spend nothing else on the game because they have limited resources, but they feel that those are important purchases. And to some extent, if we gave them a third of that value for free, it might cut out a third of the value that we receive from a lot of our incremental users. And the bulk of users who just make up the people that spend $20 on tabs and that's their lifetime spend, that does contribute a lot to our bottom line. And so this is one thing that's good in theory, but it could also have a negative impact. And I want to make sure we've assessed that before we accidentally jump into it, because I really, really don't want to accidentally hurt our revenue. That's like number one thing I shouldn't be doing.
Right.
This isn't the answer that players wanted to hear necessarily, but the honesty and foresight regarding their bottom line and the need to make money as a business is appreciated. Stash tabs, supporter packs, and cosmetics are the sole revenue source for grinding gear games. The issue of botting was also mentioned, as providing free tabs to every account that's made, which is also free, almost entirely removed the barrier for entry of bot networks.
What about a compromise? And I know I'm like asking a lot about this, but like trading is such a core feature of the game. What about letting the normal tabs at least trade? Like, sure, keep the like coloring scheme and keep the naming scheme, but at least let everybody have one trading tab. Is such a core feature of the game.
I'm not opposed to this, though it does touch the two things we discussed before. One of them being, if we screw around with this, someone could say, I spent money buying that in order to trade, and now it's available for free for everyone. And while, I repeat, I don't think that that's actually like a legal problem, I do think we have to be careful about how people perceive it. And secondly, no, second thing's gone. Yeah, sorry, getting too old.
Sorry.
A good enough answer, and yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I'm open to it though, right? Like, I'm not saying no to that. It's something that we probably should experiment with.
Yeah.
There's also questions of shill accounts as well, where a person could register 1,000 accounts to be able to list stuff on trade for free. That is a thing. Currently, you have to spend money before you're able to get things into the trade system. And so that helps prevent abuse when it's tied to an account with purchases on it.
Sure. I get that. That is a lot of effort though. If that person's going to make like 1,000 accounts or 100 accounts, they probably don't have the like biggest intention of spending money on the game to begin with.
Oh, right. But what if they were a large syndicate of item farmers with massive automation and, it's...
Right.
It is concerning because right now the large syndicates of item farmers can't easily.
Do we not have bots already?
I don't want to make it worse, and we're working very hard. Like, our bot situation is rather good at the moment, right? Like, people use the word solved, and I say to them, it is not solved, and get all angry. But that's just me with my strong opinions about that.
Right.
Right now the payment thing is an issue, right? Like, if a bot network needs to get currency tabs and so on, which they want to do for efficiency and various internal reasons, they have to spend money on this, and then we can attack them from a payments point of view. We can see what cards they're using, and we can, unfortunately, often stolen credit cards, which is kind of sad, but either way, it's an angle, right? But that they can be all anonymous behind proxies if there's no need to put any actual real money into our account.
Right. That makes sense.
Or cynically, we want the bots to pay us. That's a really good argument the chat should be making. I'm kidding though.
That you eventually ban and then encourage them to repay you again, right?
Unfortunately, because of the chargebacks, we lose like $10 for each time one of the poor victims who had his credit card used. So what we'll often do is refund the purchases when we realize it's credit card fraud, we'll ban the account, refund the purchases so that we avoid the chargeback fee and the poor guy in middle America doesn't lose his $10.
In late 2017, the way trade functioned was changed once more in an attempt to distance the experience away from third-party websites and applications. But would it be enough this time? The forum scraping bots that allowed the indexing of available items from players' forum shops was completely unintentional and an issue GGG didn't foresee, but they never banned for its use, as the game client was never touched or invaded during this process. They also couldn't prevent their public website and forums from being scraped. Grinding Gear Games was initially fine with the trade environment that PoE.Trade provided. What they weren't okay with was the fact that in order to post items to forum shops easily, a third-party application was being used that required players' account details to be linked, including the web session ID, namely the procurement app that we talked about earlier in the video. This was a huge vulnerability for their player base, and though nothing malicious by the procurement developers ever took place, Grinding Gear Games needed to step in to resolve the potential fallout. The root cause of all these third-party trade sites and applications lied with them and their trade system, and so they stepped in and took action. In a news post and development manifesto that was posted on the official forums in November of 2017, Chris spoke on the upcoming API changes to online trade and the announcement of an official trade site, hosted on the Path of Exile website. He also went over his deeper philosophies on why items in an ARPG should matter, and how trade is pivotal to that, stating that fundamentally the ability to trade any item in the game is why people enjoy Path of Exile. That next big item could be sold to literally fund an entirely new build, could drop for you at any moment. Perhaps the most telling section of this trade manifesto was his breakdown on the consequences of making trade too easy. His primary examples were that easy trade reduces the number of times a character improves their items, resulting in reaching their goals too quickly and burning out even faster. Easy trade would also potentially mean needing to reduce drop rates overall, as the best items would quickly become available in a trade economy, and upgrades would become easier and easier to acquire. His core philosophy was that easy trade would only serve to widen the gap between new and experienced players, as newer players engage with trade less often and less efficiently than more experienced and deeply enfranchised players. His last point here, and granted this was over 7 years ago, was that faster trade and item acquisition and the economy would allow for greater abuse by automation. And while they actively strive to stomp out bots and abusive behavior, eliminating the player interaction portion of trade would allow for bots to instantly buy out underpriced or undervalued items to sell for a profit. All of these factors, as well as their comparison of item acquisition to other games that made upgrades trivial and too easy to obtain, are part of the many reasons that GGG believes in trade friction. The introduction of the official trade website eventually overshadowed third-party websites like PoE.Trade and others, especially as the development of the official website became better and better over time. Listing items became as simple as placing and pricing them in a premium stash tab. Searching and locating items is made easy via the trade site. Even whispering the player for the item you're interested in just takes a single button press on the website. Whether or not that player responds to your message and the speed at which these trades occur, as well as a few other factors, are the remaining frustrations and intentional friction of trading that Grinding Gear Games wants to leave in their game. At ExileCon 2019, Quinn asked Chris Wilson about any plans to improve the trading experience to at least have the browser version of trade in the game somehow.
Completely different subject. In terms of trading, so obviously you guys have said you don't want an auction house and things like that, but there was talk of incorporating some sort of in-game browser where you could, instead of having to alt-tab to like PoE.Trade and, use third-party stuff, you could do it in-game via some sort of, panel interface.
I think that's far more likely than an auction house, yes.
So that PoE2 may happen,
If we were to add an in-game trade browser that goes to the trade site and lets you view it and stuff, that could be done at any time rather than in PoE2. It's just something that we haven't had time to actually go and do yet. There's subtlety to it. Like, we'd want to use an actual browser to render it, and that means embedding a copy of Chromium or whatever in the game, and then there's various issues and compatibility, and, it's doable, entirely doable. It's just a matter of time.
That potential band-aid solution is still unfortunately on the back burner. Slight improvements have been made to the search parameters and API, but all of those minor improvements pale in comparison to the introduction of the currency exchange market that's now in the game. Before, exchange bots were praised for their efficient trading via the bulk item exchange option on the official trade website. In these trade scenarios, you would pick the item you wanted in bulk and the item you were offering. You would be shown listings of other players, and mostly bots, that were performing this currency liquidation nearly all hours of the day and were always online. You'd whisper them just like you would for a normal item, get an instant invite, go to their hideout, and make the exchange in seconds. And I'm sure they made a pretty penny constantly flipping and manipulating these markets. Then Last Epoch and 11th Hour Games announced their innovative solution to trade in the player economy while keeping everything in-game. This genius move caused grinding your game's philosophy to shift slightly.
Yeah, I mean, are you fundamentally approaching trade from any different way? I believe, I feel like I remember you said you weren't, but I would love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, so previously we had said that we're not really wanting to change how trade is. But I think, okay, so then the situation now is different because, you know, like people are seeing things like Last Epoch and so on, and what they're doing with trade, and the people are like really liking what they're doing. And so then I don't know that we live in a world anymore where the current system that we have is good enough. And so that means that we have to change.
Before long, Path of Exile fans were graced in late July of 2024 with the amazing patch 3.25 expansion league, Settlers of Kalguur. Among many awesome inclusions and league-specific additions to the game, the thing that generated the most buzz was the currency exchange market that would now be available. You could now complete these bulk currency trades all via an in-game UI in real time. A completely player-driven currency economy with fluctuating exchange rates and all. This was another large step forward in reducing the friction of player-to-player trade. Five months after the release of Settlers of Kalguur, Path of Exile and ARPG fans were finally able to log in to the early access version of Path of Exile 2 on December 6th, 2024. Unfortunately, GGG decided to stick to their guns on maintaining friction in trading. We have the same currency exchange market that Path of Exile 1 saw in Settlers of Kalguur, which is a huge step, but trading is still the same in every other regard. It's just a slightly different website and different items being bought and sold, due to the sequel being an entirely separate game. As new players funnel in and out of the game, and particularly players that didn't play Path of Exile 1, the complaint I see popping up time and time again is how antiquated and immersion-breaking the current trade system is. Not to mention the rampant price fixing and scamming that continues to happen within this system. Here's Jonathan again talking about the hurdles that they face with this auction house system.
Let's talk about the axioms of like what we assume, right? So, we are a game that does not have bind on anything, right? We are not a game that has binding in it, right? That's a very important thing for us.
Okay.
So any system that involved binding, we don't want to do that.
Oh.
Number two, if you have a trade system that's ultra easy, that has no friction at all, like if you imagine just like instant buyout with with no restriction, like everything's just completely free trade, what you'll get is an exponential curve where effectively the stuff that is the most powerful will become very, 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 very expensive, and the stuff that's anything even below that will become extremely, extremely cheap. So you get this kind of exponential curve, and effectively, if you imagine a game with no trade, you've got like a flat, effectively like power and difficulty acquire, price and difficulty acquire are completely flat.
Yep.
Not that in a game with no trade that would even make sense, but effectively it turns into a flat line, and then you get more and more exponential as you as you increase the easiness of trade. So therefore, the assumption is that there has to be some way of, in order for a game to be able to have trade, there needs to be something that restricts its use in some manner. And the previous way we looked at that was that you can either have instant buyouts or you can have instant like good search. And what we've been saying is, okay, well, I don't think players are going to accept anything less than instant buyouts, because I don't think there is a way to solve to solve the kinds of problems that people have with trade and PoE without having instant buyouts. So therefore, we now have to take as an axiom there must be instant buyouts, right? We must have that. There must be in some manner a way. How can we have that without having this problem? Now, previously we would have said, okay, well, in that case you can't have good search, but people will not accept a solution that doesn't involve the ability to search for items correctly. Therefore, we must have a proper search function.
Okay.
So what are we to do now then, right? Like if we must have instant buyouts and search, there has to be some manner of way to limit trade in some other means.
Yeah.
Now, if we're not going to have binding, that means there has to be some form of resource that limits trade in some manner that you have to play the game to get. And if that's the case, well, what resources do we have? Well, in PoE2, we have gold. And if gold is something, so therefore we discussed basically gold can be a limiting factor. And if we make it so that you can't trade gold, you can only play for gold. And if we add a gold fee as a part of an instant buyout cost, that can mean that we can potentially have a trade system that has instant buyouts and searching while still having a way to and no binding and all that sort of stuff. So it is possible to do that.
Back then, it sounded like their intent was to have the instant buyout system be the primary means for trade with a gold fee. But they don't want to completely remove the ability to trade player to player. I'm really curious how this dual system might work, and I want to hear your thoughts on this potential implementation. It doesn't seem like it's coming anytime soon, but it is potentially the future of Path of Exile 2. Early access is a time for testing, and I'm really hopeful to see some changes on the topic of trade and the player economy in Path of Exile 2, as the game evolves during this early access period. The currency exchange market was a smash success, and the implementation of gold is a direct requirement to play the game. Gold could easily be used as the barrier of entry for buying and selling items on an auction house. The taxing of gold for listings and purchases could serve to lower the amount of bots potentially interacting with the auction house system. I'm curious to hear your proposed solutions for trade in Path of Exile 2. Are you on the side of Chris Wilson and Jonathan in that trade and item acquisition needs friction? Or are you full-on Team Auction House like myself? Definitely let me know down in those comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more Path of Exile 2 content and documentaries like these, and I'll see you all in the next video. Farewell.